what I wanted to do is build on some of Martin's comments and talk a little bit about the food system as an exemplar for the way that we run our world. And I'm not going to diagnose the problem in the sense that our food system is the #1 polluter on a global basis, big driver of climate change from multiple dimensions, is what underpins global ill health. More people die as a result of poor diets than any other cause of mortality. More people are sick because of poor diets and air pollution and all the rest of that because of our food system. Instead, I'm going to talk about why our food system is as it is, the economic drivers, and how we can perhaps address them. So following the Second World War, through the Green Revolution, etc., there was always the underlying issue that our food system ought to provide more calories on a per capita basis, and by providing more calories, food prices would go down. And this is data over my lifetime from the 1960s that shows over this slide that as we improve cereal yields, prices come down, and as we improve cereal yields, per capita availability goes up. And that whole notion that we should design our food system because cheaper food is a public good has led us to where we are now. But we have reached the limits of that paradigm in the sense that if we improve cereal yields, it drives down the price of food. As it drives down the price of food, it increases the economic rationality of wasting it, and it increases the availability of per capita food on a daily basis, so we overeat it. And what you can see on the right-hand panel is that food waste is increasing disproportionately to yield increase. It's accelerating, and so is the prevalence of obesity. So a unit of increment in yield creates more than a unit increment in harm that comes from our food system. And we call this the cheaper food paradigm, in the sense that cheaper food as a kind of design notion for our system is driving a whole load of negatives. And each time we think, oh, well, we'll improve our yields and we'll grow more food, it just makes things worse. And I'll just talk through this quickly. Cheaper food paradigm, which is intensifying agriculture, the research that goes into that, coupled with liberalization of markets so that a country can sell its goods all over the world, make a lot of money, driving climate change. Climate change is increasingly driving yield decline, as yields go down relatively, we say, oh, we need to intensify agriculture further. As yields go down because of climate change, agriculture needs to expand because we're saying yields are going down. That impacts on biodiversity. Obviously, agricultural expansion is related to the profits that you can make from food anyway, as in Amazonian deforestation or palm oil or whatever that might be, driving the growth of agriculture. As we drive climate change, it creates more competition for land because we need to grow more trees, and doing that makes us grow things in different places in different ways, which creates more pressure on land conversion, which drives more climate change. As we drive the intensification of agriculture, it depletes soils, which drives yield down, which makes us say, oh, we've got to intensify agriculture further. As we intensify agriculture further, we grow more and more and more, or fewer and fewer and fewer. 50% of the world's calories come from 3 crops, 80% of the world's calories come from 8 crops. That means that we're growing at vast intensity and at vast scale, relatively small things in monoculture. That drives biodiversity down. As we intensify agriculture, it reduces prices, so we waste more, and that drives climate change. As we concentrate on wheat, rice, maize, and a few others, that makes prices go down, so it becomes economically rational to feed grain to livestock. As we concentrate everything on wheat, rice, maize, plus a few other crops, we have dietary convergence on a global basis that everybody's eating calories and not enough nutrition. That adds to malnourishment in all its forms. And as we have more livestock, it obviously drives more climate change, blah, blah, blah. And as we drive climate change, it reduces the nutrient content of food, which also contributes to malnourishment. So my point here is that what we have created is a complex system with all of the feedbacks and negative unintended consequences and whatever. It's a complex system which is deeply, deeply dysfunctional. And every time we think the answer is in growing more food, it just makes things worse. and it is a complex system. It is internally stable. It is resilient to change because it's a complex system. And the issue is there isn't one thing on this diagram that you could point at and say, if we did that differently, everything else would be improved, because it's not like that. So what might drive change in the system? Well, the way I articulate it is that the change makers are a triumvirate of the way that people interact with markets, and people interact with politics, and politics interact with markets. As Martin says, you've got to make the politics less toxic, which means that the people have to be agreeing to be for change to happen. If people change attitudes, politics will change, and as people and politics change, markets will change, and it becomes the potential for that kind of three-way interaction. But we often fall into the problem, the wrong framing, that it's either politics or it's people or it's markets. But of course, it's a combination, all of them. And markets are obviously shaped by things like financial investments from other sorts of markets as well. So within that bubble, you've got people, politics, and markets that interact. And then you've got exogenous things that will drive issues around that. And some of those exogenous issues are geopolitical change, some of the things that we've just been talking about with Martin, new technology perhaps, impacts of climate change, and so on. So I'll just briefly whiz through some thoughts about this. So starting with the people bucket, people are increasingly recognizing, as Jim Hansen said in 1988 when he first testified in Congress, people will buy into climate change when they notice the weather is changing and start getting impacted by extreme weather. And people all over the world are recognizing that climate change is not making their lives better. And furthermore, increasingly recognizing, I mean, it's been interesting looking at the polling through COVID, the links between food systems, climate change, and even emerging diseases. Even if you ignore that kind of big envelope, you just look at insurance losses. I can't remember what the exact figure was. I think it's £78 billion was the cost of the Californian wildfires in 2018. And then they had a similar fire season the following year. We're getting to the stage where it is becoming patently obvious that even within my lifetime, I don't want to see climate change happening anymore. So it's bringing that long-term horizon. I'm not thinking about my children and their children only. I'm also thinking about my insurance bills over the next year or two. People are also recognizing that things like food have different associations with different types of food. And particularly, I'll skip over the details of this. If you compare, for example, 100 grams of protein produced by beef or 100 grams of protein produced from tofu, then the footprint is very, very, very different. And beef is 25 times more polluted from a GHG perspective and 75 times more land parasitizing. So people are recognizing that the environment is driving mental health issues and well-being issues and anxiety issues associated with climate change. They're recognizing that climate and diets and biodiversity and diets are related together, and increasingly that people are also recognizing the relationship between poor ill health and diet. Certainly in the UK, over 70% of people under 65 who have died from COVID have the comorbidity of obesity associated with them from eating too many calories and not enough nutrients. So to a first approximation, dietary change, if we're going to drive ourselves towards a better healthy diet, we would also have a diet that is lower footprint and more sustainable. So all these things together, people's recognition that the world is different and people's recognition that I want to eat better is one lever to go in. And of course, one of the interesting things about complex systems, whether they're dynamical systems in the sense of the food system map I've just shown you, or societal systems, is that there is scope for tipping points. And one of the things that we underestimate often is that you can get social tipping points that work quite quickly. Politics, changing the drivers of politics. I think, you know, in my time working across UK government and European government, there is an increasing recognition that the costs from the food system are levied in different policy areas, and we have to get smarter. In the UK, we have a food economy worth about 120 billion. But when you add up the costs from poor diets to our health service, the costs of pollution to water and air quality, the costs of carbon dioxide, the cost of biodiversity loss, etc., antimicrobial resistance, silting up of watercourses, you get a similar order of magnitude of costs. So the benefits of changing our production system, changing our diets, are just as big as the economic benefits of the entire system. And when analyses have been done at a global level, you get a similar sorts of things, that sometimes even our food system is costing us more than the money we make from it. And so one of the interesting things about the last 10 years in the UK government, at least, is the greater recognition of these different costs across the system, and the move towards thinking from a national perspective and in whole of government thinking, where should our drive for a better food system come from? And of course, there are multiple levers that policy can use to change attitudes to food or sustainability or the environment. And Martin mentioned some of the ones. R&D at the top, lots of things we can do. R&D, we can incentivize smarter land use, we can change markets, we can change our trade relationships, we can act to reduce waste and change behavior, we can incentivize better food choices, we can even use planning law to say where it's okay to put a fast food restaurant outside a school, and so on. There are many ways that we can push our system in the right direction if we choose to use it, and I could talk about this for a very long time. This table, by the way, comes out of the IPCC special report on climate change and land food chapter that I was an author of a couple of years ago. When it comes to the market side, so people, politics, markets, one of the interesting things I think is that as consumers get more sophisticated and as citizens get more understanding, they're wanting to see transparency in the market, and we've got the digital tools to provide transparency. So rather than people going into a food store and buying food based on trust or on the hope that somebody's regulating it, we can increasingly rely on long-term blockchain type radical transparency that's coming onto the market. And so this might well drive business models. We're talking about it with the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures, applying to a whole range of business for driving finance, but we can do it in multiple ways for food and other aspects of our lives. And then, of course, events happen in the external world that can drive the system. You know, climate change issues this year, COVID, etc. People are sensitized by a whole range of different things. And this is from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report. Round the outside of this diagram are megatrends, and what you can see from these: growth of non-communicable diseases, rise of nationalism, breakdown of multilateralism, geopolitical shift, polarizing society, rising inequality. There's a whole lot of negative things that are happening which are destabilizing the future. And the upside of the destabilization of the future is that when the system starts to creak and break because something's happened, that is the time when radical system change can occur. Build back better, if only we could build back better as per the political rhetoric at the moment. So there are multiple drivers of radical change that are with us: dietary health, blah, 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 blah. The external environment is shocking the system. And when they're shocking the system, it's loosening the chains of resilience. Change, I think, requires the politicization of issues so that we signal as citizens that we want the system to change. So politicians buy that signal and think they're not going to lose votes in it, and so on. Finance and all the other things can help drive the politicization of issues in that way. And I think transparency is key, and transparency is one of the very positives that's arising from a greater digitalization of our supply chains. So politicization of the issues, telling people as it is, making things obvious, and then hopefully political and market change will come from that. Thank you very much.
I have one question from Andrew Shang. whether what you're saying is this a classic policy paradox where politics try to resolve conflicts, whereas economics based on rational men come up with policies that politicians can't implement without pain and losing their job?
Yes, I guess in a way, but it's also our food system and climate change in general is an example of a radical market failure, in the sense that the economic incentives are not there to allow rational man, in his phrase, to make a rational decision. So we are not pricing in the externalities of the way our lives impinge upon our future lives. And if we did price in those externalities, the market would have a better chance of balancing consumption with sustainable demand. At the moment, we have driven demand and incentivized demand to the point where any country that chooses to externalize costs on the environment gains a competitive advantage, and it drives a race to the bottom. So it's not economics per se that's the problem. It is the way that we aren't pricing the environmental costs into the economics that means that everything runs away from us.